Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for listening to another episode of the EdTech Startup Show. I'm your host, Gerard Dawson, and today's guest is Graham Forman, the founder and managing director of Edovate Capital. Edovate Capital is a seed and early stage venture capital company who's invested in companies like ThinkCirca, KickUp, Great Slam, Swing Education, and plenty of others that you might be familiar with. So Graham, thanks for coming on the show.
Gerard, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. This will be fun.
Yeah, I think so too. For folks who are perhaps less familiar with the investment side of EdTech, maybe folks who are in the classroom or just starting out on their entrepreneurial journey, how do you describe your work and how it relates to education?
Yeah, that's great. So I would say what I'm currently doing now is spending quite a bit of time meeting with entrepreneurs, early stage entrepreneurs, and advising them in various ways. I meet with 500 to 750 EdTech entrepreneurs that are early stage each year and invest in only a few of them. Unfortunately, I don't have the resources to invest in a lot of them, but I best invest in a few of them. And for the others, I certainly try to figure out how else I can be a resource for them in terms of providing advice on questions that they've got, making an introduction to my network that could be helpful, pointing them to other resources that could help them. That's the biggest part of my job. I also research and read a lot about the industry to understand what's happening in the industry and just trends in schools and trends with education technology.
That's fascinating and seems like for somebody who likes to learn, that's close to an ideal day. Just get to talk to a bunch of people with new ideas and then spend the rest of your time reading and researching. So,
well, yeah, I'm inspired every day by the entrepreneurs that are out there identifying problems and developing solutions to try to address those problems. So it's super energizing.
Right. So you said 500 to 700 entrepreneurs per year, and it's reminding me of teaching, let's say 100 students per year, and I've taught for 9 years. So there's certain patterns that I see in terms of how a class is behaving and what they might need, or an individual student's body language and how to communicate with them. For you, after talking to hundreds or thousands of entrepreneurs, what are some patterns you notice about human beings, about entrepreneurs, about signs for success? What have you concluded or theorized?
Yeah, I mean, I think so many people that come to education entrepreneurship come from having spent time either with technology or in the classroom as an educator or an administrator, and they have a passion for the work, and they also have some deep insight into a problem that they're trying to solve, and they're beginning that journey, or they're well down that journey of building something to support a student or support a teacher, support an administrator. And just in terms of patterns, I mean, the things that we talk about that are often the most challenging are around financing. So they have an idea, or they have an initial product, and they want to scale it, and they want to identify funds to be able to get to the next level. Another big pattern is, how do I get this out to people? Now that I've built it, and I have some initial users, maybe even some initial schools on board, how do I go from that small first cohort of users to a much bigger, more scaled set of users? And that's a big challenge. Raising money is a big challenge. Scaling, distribution is a big challenge. But the great ones are able to accomplish both and to be able to sustain that. Yeah.
So that makes sense, right? People have the idea or the first step, and they look to you for the next the next step, basically, or some sort of advice or guidance or resources.
That's right. And there's a certain stage at which I invest, and many entrepreneurs are too early for that. But it's really valuable to get to know, and this I think goes for any entrepreneur who might be interested in engaging investors. I think there's real value from the investor side in being able to develop a relationship with that entrepreneur over time. I like to see, are they telling me what they're going to do, and then when they follow up, are they actually doing that? Did they actually meet the milestones that they set for themselves? Am I able to add value as an advisor to what they're doing? And I think for any entrepreneur, if you're reaching out to folks and want to engage folks, asking for advice is a marvelous way to do it. There's an old adage, if you ask for advice, you might get investment, and if you ask for investment, you'll probably get advice. So you might as well start by asking advice and developing an authentic relationship that way.
Right. So I remember that you and I first connected because of your Medium pieces, actually. I think I saw you sharing a bunch of them on LinkedIn and read them and thought they were great and valuable. So I'm an English teacher and I'm also a writer, so I'm always fascinated by other writers. Can you tell me a little bit about your writing process and how, if you see it this way, if how writing plays a role in your professional life?
Yeah, well, first, thanks for reading. I appreciate that. Blogging is something that is new to me, but it's something that I'm really enjoying doing, really because it connects me with inspiring education innovators like yourself. I've met a lot of great people through the blogging. So as for writing, I mentioned earlier, I speak with over 500 tech entrepreneurs annually, and many of them ask extremely thoughtful questions. Some I've thought something about before, and then some that are just kind of new and challenging and require me to think more deeply about, how I would respond to that, or what in my experience, in education as an entrepreneur and now an investor, what in there might be of value to them. And so those questions that really challenge me, they're often the topics that I end up writing about. And I write to think through the topic, and if I like the results of that thought process, I might publish it. I've certainly written about other things that I haven't published, and my wife is an editor by training, and so she keeps me honest. It has to pass her test for clarity and quality, and they certainly don't all pass her test. And then the other reason I guess I do it is, as an entrepreneur, I know how important it is to continue learning, but I also know it's entrepreneurs don't have a lot of time to consume a lot of content. So things that are short and actionable are often best. So I try to provide, actionable takeaways through the blog that are, just 3 to 5 minutes of reading, where maybe you walk away with 1 or 2 things that you could go out and start doing. And so, it keeps me motivated too. That's the other thing about writing is it just keeps me motivated because it's been a marvelous way to connect with others that are doing amazing things. As an example, I had a conversation this morning with an entrepreneur in Prague who found me, who's working on a platform that will enable students to learn about and create virtual reality and augmented reality. And he found me and contacted me through the Medium post. So that keeps me going.
Yeah, the writing as thinking and writing as learning are so important. I think especially for somebody who is taking in tons of information, whether that's somebody like you who's hearing from so many entrepreneurs, or also for somebody who's starting their own project and they have tons of inputs from initial users or folks they're getting advice from. So I appreciate that approach for sure. And another thing you mentioned before we began recording was that you call yourself a community catalyst. So that word community is one that we find often in education, and catalyst for me does have the connotation of innovation and even, business results or progress. So tell me about why you use that name or label for yourself.
Well, I guess maybe one first step might be to give a little bit of background as to how I got here as well. So I spent most of my career actually as an education entrepreneur, as a software entrepreneur. So I had 3 startups, all in education over 15 years. And I had my successes. 2 of them did very well, and one of them didn't. And so I start with, a lot of empathy for people that want to start and build, impact-focused companies in education. And so I was fortunate enough, and I got great support along the way, and now I can invest and support others. So to me, the community catalyst work is in part about just trying to help support others as they get started on their journey. And it's a challenging journey for sure. I mean, the life of an entrepreneur can be very lonely at times. It's filled with ups and downs. And I think it's important for people to get a sense of, what that life is like before they quit their day job and they just jump in with both feet. So a lot of what we do here in Colorado, where I am, is organize events that are just designed to give people a taste of what that is like, and then help provide some of those supports for them so if they want to make that move, there are others out there that they can connect with. So, as an example, we just wrapped up our 4th annual Startup Weekend Education, which is a marvelous event for anybody out there who is thinking about starting up but hasn't. It's a 54-hour event over the course of the weekend where, you pitch an idea that you're passionate about. You don't have to pitch an idea, but you pitch if you want to. You join a team. You work with mentors and coaches over the weekend. And by the end of the weekend, by Sunday afternoon, you're actually pitching an idea in front of judges for prizes. And so without quitting your day job, you have this sort of intensive startup experience over a weekend. And I love doing it because it's so inspiring. I mean, the people who participate in these events, I mean, they can accomplish more in 48 hours than some startup teams I've seen do in 2 or 3 months. And some of them end up going on and forming teams after having met and launching these businesses. And that just gets me excited and gets me going. So that's one example of the community catalyst work. We also do events around Startup Week activities. So Boulder Startup Week, Denver Startup Week, we organize a series of education-focused events. So a couple of examples of what community catalyst looks like to me.
Right. That seems like an appropriate name for the work there. I have to ask, are there any examples of clever or creative ideas that you've seen pitched at the Startup Weekend Education, just because that format seems so high energy and exciting?
Well, you said the word clever. And we all know that company in education, that actually started at a Startup Weekend.
Oh, wow. The company Clever? Yeah.
It did. Yep.
That's awesome. I would love to talk to, I guess, Dan Carroll is one of the folks and the gentleman on the team there. Yeah, I would love to talk to them, but that's I did not know that. Interesting.
Yeah, that's one example. I mean, we've seen all kinds of examples. There's a company that won the first year that we did it, that now is a team of 6. They've raised more than $1 million. And the problem that they're addressing is how to essentially teach students algebra that are struggling with algebraic concepts. And so they've developed a gamified platform that teaches students algebra. And it's a critical foundational math skill. Lots of students don't think they're good at math, or they don't progress at math because they struggle at algebra. And this company, Figure Math, is trying to solve that problem. And that was a Startup Weekend story from our first year of organizing Startup Weekend Education.
Right. So you're talking about solving problems through startups, but one of the foundational problems really that EdTech startups face is the challenge of selling to schools, which you've have a few types of experience with. So I guess first, before getting into some of your knowledge and experience on growth for EdTech startups, I'm curious, as somebody who moved to investing, with all of the different markets out there and with your understanding of the challenges of the education sector, why did you choose to do seed stage investing in EdTech in particular?
Well, it's a good question. I've had a lot of other investors ask me a similar question, because it's obviously not easy to build scaled businesses within education. But it's I guess the first answer is it's really sort of what I know. I mean, my background was as an operator in education technology startups over 15 years. I built teams, sales teams, marketing teams, business development teams, serving schools and districts with software. And so I learned a lot about what to do, and certainly a lot about what not to do as well in terms of approaching schools. And so, I try to stay within my circle of competence there in my investing. So, that's what I know. And I guess second, if we want to talk a little bit about, some of those challenges, there are certainly a lot of challenges to selling to schools, but one of the reasons I invest is there are many businesses that have been built. As an operator and an investor, I'm very proud that I've been involved with many that have scaled to serve thousands, even tens of thousands of schools. And they do tend to take a little longer in education than perhaps in other sectors, if you will, but I believe they're no less enduring as businesses. And, I'd add one more point about this. I think there's just so much opportunity with education. I think education has lagged in terms of technological advancement compared to other industries that we all know. But I think it's just a matter of time before it modernizes and education really begins to help support the rethinking of school. And so fundamentally, I believe education is going to change more in the next 30 to 40 years than it has in the last 1,000 years. And technology is going to help enable those changes. And I really want to be a part of that over my career.
That's a fascinating way to frame it, that of the 30 to 40 year change surpassing the 1,000-year change, which I tend to agree with. There's, for example, the proliferation of devices. So one-to-one programs growing in popularity. I'm curious about what are some of the other trends or forces that are coming together that make you say that about the accelerated change that you predict?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think you pointed to one of those technological changes. And I think on the technological side, I think there's some macro trends that are going to enable more rapid change. The proliferation of devices is an example. The access to broadband. More than 95% of schools now in the U.S. have broadband, and that number is very soon going to be 100%. You now have app stores that make it fast and easy to not only build technology, but to distribute and access technology. And that trend is across society, but it's really, I think, still early days in terms of seeing the effect. There also are some societal changes that I think are driving this. And certainly the social mission of backing education entrepreneurs is also very inspiring and motivating to me. And I guess underlying this thinking is the belief that talent is distributed equally, but opportunity is not. And education to me is what can really level the playing field for everyone. And I think that's the case now more than ever, the importance of education. If we think about what's at stake for schools, students, and teachers, we're living in a world where the world of work is changing at a faster and faster clip, and students need to be prepared with 21st century skills to succeed. And this to me means equity, right? This means being able to serve all students across the system. And I don't think that's possible without technology enabling that equity of access. So personally, I want to be part of making that happen. And I think the stakes or the consequences of not enabling that are potentially devastating to our democracy and to our society. So I'm really bullish on equity and how technology can help enable that equity of access for all students.
Yeah, this is a fascinating aspect of the conversation. And it's interesting because I hear a few different perspectives on this, where some people have a bit of a fear of, to oversimplify it, too much technology entering public schools to, for example, reduce the impact of the teacher or to reduce face-to-face interaction. So again, I'm not claiming these as my beliefs. I'm just trying to highlight things that are part of the conversation. So for somebody like you who gets to see a high level picture of trends and of things that people are trying to do to improve education, what do you say about people who have fears or skepticism about more technology or new technology making its way into education?
Well, I think they're healthy fears. I think there are real concerns around screen time or device time for students, for kids. And I think part of that is driven by the nature of some of the technology that's out there. And let me give you an example of where we are, and then maybe I can give you an example of where we're headed that I'm more bullish about and what I see. So I think the first generation of a lot of these technologies are a student with a device just working with that device independently. So, I can think of a number of technologies where it's really just the student and the device. There's not an interaction with the teacher. There's not an interaction with the student. And I think that's probably a natural first step. I can think of readers. I can think of math tools where that's what it enables. What I'm hoping, and I call that sort of a first generation of many of these tools, what I'm starting to see more of, and I'm bullish on, are tools that I'd say are more a second generation that enable more collaboration and interaction with small groups of students or with the teacher, right? So that it's not about the technology. It's about that social collaboration, that teamwork, that working in small groups. And the technology really is just enabling that interaction. And one example from my portfolio is a company called ThinkCirca, which is enabling small groups to learn critical thinking and argumentative writing skills. And it's empowering the teacher to teach that, and it's empowering groups of students to work together towards these arguments, this critical thinking around current events and concepts. Pear Deck is another marvelous example of this that enables real-time interaction between teachers and students and other students through the platform. So again, I think it's all how the technology is used. If the real use case for the technology is one-on-one device time, the student and the device, that has real limits and that has real concerns. If the use case is getting teachers and students to collaborate and work together, and then the device or the technology better enables that collaboration, then I think that's positive.
Right. I definitely, especially as a teacher, I definitely tend to agree. Uh, One of the key phrases for me is always something along the lines of freeing up the teacher to, or allowing the students to, right? When it's kind of serving a function to move on to some higher order skill or experience. That's what I also appreciate in terms of a technology tool. And
Yeah,
go
I
ahead.
think Gerard, just to add to that, I just think that's a great insight, right? I think those technologies for entrepreneurs out there that are thinking about working with schools, working with teachers, working with students, I think that's such a great insight. Create something that helps them do the job to be done more efficiently and effectively. I do see entrepreneurs launching tools with the best of intentions that actually create new jobs for students and teachers and administrators. And, they struggle to get traction when you're adding to the workload that somebody already has. Teachers have many, many jobs that they have to do. Students have many pressures. But when you build something that dramatically improves a task or a job to be done for a teacher or a student or an administrator, you're on the right track.
Yeah, that's something I I definitely tend to emphasize as well in my conversations. So this is all kind of leading up to or gearing up to something that I definitely hear a lot as a question, but you have so much experience and really data to draw from to answer, which is for those companies that we'll just assume are creating something that's going to genuinely improve the learning experience of students and make life easier for teachers and school leaders. What do you see working for them in early stages when they're trying to grow, and what do you see not working?
Yeah, again, I think a great question. Certainly reflected on this a lot. In terms of those things that are working, I mean, I guess the first thing to say is, growing a company is really difficult. I've been part of 3 as an operator, and 2 of them succeeded, and one of them just flat out failed. So I have the utmost respect for people that start companies with a passion to serve schools. I mean, if it was easy, everybody would be doing it well, but it's not easy. And so I would say to start, right, if you want a successful path to growth, it's building on that earlier comment, which is you really got to start by addressing a big problem that many in education are working to solve. And in education, there are lots of those big problems. So if you've got a deep understanding of the problem, then I think you design a product that dramatically improves one of those jobs to be done by a student, teacher, or administrator. It needs to address a current job that many people are really working to improve and to solve. I think that's probably the most important first step, and you've got to build it elegantly. It's got to be really a pioneering approach and an elegant, I think, a focused approach to solve that problem. And then I'd say second, no matter how good a product is, it really doesn't sell itself. And there are, I think, a number of ways to go about and to get this out to schools and districts. The good news, the macro trends that we discussed earlier, they're really driving changes to the traditional model of selling to schools and districts, which is more of a top-down, approach the administrator, get the administrator's approval, and then we'll distribute that across the system. That's still happening, and there are successful companies that are scaling that way. But now with broadband, with cheap devices, the access to those, with these app stores that make it so easy to access technology, there's a much more sort of distributed model of getting access to these technologies. And therefore, there are also business models that have changed to be able to take advantage of that, of these macro trends. And just to give you a couple of examples, I think a very common one now that's in use is the freemium model. And you have companies like Pear Deck and Newzilla, I think you've had on your show, and Seesaw, that are offering a free product at the classroom level that students and teachers love, and that is leading to conversations with them about what more could they offer beyond that free version. So there are premium versions of that product that are available for purchase, and they're growing very rapidly. So that freemium category is one. I think another that I'm very interested in, and I'm seeing a few examples, is selling through schools, not to schools. And that I would call sort of a B2B2C model. And a couple of examples of that are a company out of Canada called Prodigy, which is a gamified math platform that's scaled now to tens of millions of dollars in revenue. There's Epic Learning, which is a reading platform that also is growing very, very rapidly using the same model. I just spoke with another entrepreneur this morning that's working on a similar model. And I believe we're going to see more and more of this type of model and more successes to come because of the macro trends that I mentioned earlier. So those are a couple of examples, I guess, of how to grow. I think you wanted a couple of common mistakes or misconceptions, if you will.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I thought a little bit about the misconceptions, I think. One misconception that I often hear entrepreneurs talking about is this idea that selling to schools and districts takes 12 months, 18 months. And I think that's true in some contexts. You know, it can be very long if we're talking about hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars, and we're talking about an implementation process that's a massive lift. I'm thinking about student information systems and learning management systems. Mm-hmm. But I think that's only a small portion of the market. More often than not, the sales cycle shouldn't take nearly that long. If the implementation is relatively light and the price is relatively small, and I'm thinking by that I mean, 5 figures or less, then to me, a sales cycle that takes that long is the indication of a bigger problem. And that bigger problem is you might be selling something that's nice to have versus something that's a must have for that school. And so I think that could be an opportunity for that entrepreneur to figure out, okay, what could make your product a must have? Because in my experience, and I sold, products that were thousands of dollars or tens of thousands. For most school sales, the cycles were much, much shorter. I'm talking about, 60 to 90 days or less. And these tools were, they had an implementation cycle, but it wasn't a huge one. They had an investment. It was thousands or tens of thousands of dollars. So I think that's a common misconception, is it takes way too long to sell to schools and districts. I think that one other misconception, too, related to that is that they don't have money to buy products and services. I hear that from many entrepreneurs. They just don't have money. And I think, one, yes, budgets are tight. There's no question that public school budgets are tight, but school leaders do have the resources to invest in tools that solve real problems for students, teachers, and administrators. And these school budgets, by the way, they're typically 75 to 80% people costs. So, they're always looking for tools that can leverage the people that they employ, basically helping those people do more in less time or do the same work more effectively. And in my experience, a 5-figure investment is doable for most schools and districts that are trying to solve a high priority problem for them. They can draw from professional development budgets. They can draw from the technology budget. They can draw from title funds and other sources to pay for those types of solutions. So if you're an entrepreneur and the district is telling you they just don't have money to buy products and services, that could be the case. That also could be an opportunity to reflect on, what else could you do to make this a must-have type of product for them versus a nice-to-have product.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this is this is where, again, just through the lens of being a teacher and also as somebody who has kind of a marketing and communications mind for looking at business, I see a lot of value in being able to position and present the products and services in the correct way so that, like you said, it's viewed as a must have. So often I feel, and I'm curious what you think about this. Some folks present an edtech product in a really features and technology centric way, when switching that to, a benefits and people centric approach might be one of the changes that they need.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I would take even a step back and make sure you're articulating the problem in such a way that resonates with the audience as well. I think that's important because it demonstrates credibility and understanding of the problem. It gets people's mind in the right place to sort of think about that problem and maybe internalize that problem a little bit, which might motivate them to take some action. And then I think you're absolutely right. You've got to message what the benefit is, right, and what the value proposition is of the solution that you're providing to that particular problem. And it needs to be a high priority problem. Schools and districts are very busy places, and they have leaders and teachers. They can only focus on a couple of things at a time. And so if you want to get time and attention, it needs to be, I would say, a top 2 or top 3 priority for the stakeholder that you're engaging with. Otherwise, it might just come across as a nice to have, not as a must have.
Mm-hmm. So, Graham, as we're getting towards the end of our time, in a way that I think might pull things together here nicely, I've seen actually, it was a particular tweet I saw recently from someone doing work like you at Tech Investing, talking about the role of experts in various, venture capital areas, and how educators are not so much involved in edtech startup investments. So what do you think about that as an idea? Do you think there's room for more involvement by educators in the edtech startup investment field?
Well, I think first, I think educators understand the problems and the opportunities that technology can address in schools like no one else can, because they've lived it. And I think anyone that wants to start a company focused on schools, they should have educators on their team and involved from the very start. I'd say second, kind of building to your answer, educators are starting companies to create solutions in schools. In fact, most of the investments I've made are in educators and administrators who formed companies based on solving problems that they experienced when they were teachers or administrators. Pear Deck, think Circa, Learn Platform, Swing Education, Kick Up. These are all led by former educators. And I think, third, the work of innovating in schools doesn't happen without the collaboration of educators and administrators. They're really product co-designers. They're the pilots that are helping you iterate, and they're the early customers, and they should be ongoing advisors to entrepreneurs. So for, all those reasons, all those areas where they can add value, I do think there's room for educators in startup investment as well. I think particularly in the early stages, when you're really focused on that product market fit and figuring that out early on. And I think it is an opportunity right now, because one of the things that I'm observing in the investment world is many of the leading edtech investors, many of them are having success and they're raising larger funds. And when you raise a larger fund, it means you have to deploy larger investments. And to deploy larger investments, you have to move to more mature companies. And as these investors are moving to slightly more mature companies, I think that's creating a bit of a gap at the very earliest stages for seed stage specific investors. And so, if you buy the premise that there is a gap there, I think that's a marvelous place where somebody who understands investment, who is a former educator, they might be able to come in and seize an opportunity there. So I do think there's room for educators in startup investment.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. I appreciate you kind of pulling together all of your experience and knowledge to share so much during our conversation here, Graham. I think listeners will get a lot out of it, regardless of their current place in education. So for folks who are listening, you can check out Edovate Capital, Graham's website, Graham's company, at edovatecapital.com. It's EDOVATE capital, CAPITAL.com. Graham, for listeners, if you could leave them with a message of either how to reach you, something you suggest they do or check out, what would you like to leave with?
Yeah, I think another way to connect as well is through Medium, is through the blogging that I do. You can find me on Medium. You certainly can find me on LinkedIn as well. It's always great to hear from people that are passionate about education innovation, education technology, this work broadly. So yeah, I'd welcome hearing from folks.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, Graham, as the folks repairing my roof are just arriving and doing some work, we're going to end the conversation now. But thank you again for coming on the show, and for listeners. And until next time, my name is Gerard Dawson, and thanks for listening to the EdTech Startup Show.